now time for the Billy C. Show, part of the BillyCBoxing.com network.
And we're coming to you live from the Billy C Studios in Lake George, New York. I'm Bill Calogero, and it's time for the Billy C Show. Good morning, good day, good evening. Whenever you're watching, whenever you're listening, I hope you're doing okay today. Today's show, She's a Being brought to you and imparted by my book, Tom Molyneux, From Bondage to Baddest Men on the Planet, is available right now where all good books are sold. You can get a copy of this book right now while you're watching or listening to this very show. Just visit Amazon.com, or if you're looking to get a signed copy, just drop me an email, Billy@TalkinBoxing. That's TalkinBoxing.com. Today's show is also being brought to us in part by BillyCBoxing.com. Check it out. All the latest and greatest news that's fit to print, plus some other stuff that you might not see in other places. So check out BillyCBoxing.com. And also, today's show is being brought to us in part by CES, Classic Entertainment in Sports Boxing. We have another trivia question for you coming up a little bit later to win yourself a pair of tickets to a really good show on October 25th in Revere, Massachusetts. It was just announced that DAZN will be picking that up. So, and I'll tell you who won the tickets to the November 2nd event at Mohegan Sun for getting last week's trivia question right. And remember, if you're watching the replay of this show or listening to the podcast, answer the question because you never know. I mean, don't assume somebody already won it. So coming up on the show today, I'm going to be talking about the fights from this past weekend, the whole card, what I thought of the card, what I thought of the presentation, the whole nine, and, of course, the fight results, plus my thoughts on the Beterbiev and Bivol rematch. Also coming up later on the show, you guys saw me with this book here. I know my man Coach is in the chat room. Give a shout-out to Coach and Jesus. Saw this book on Lou Ambers. Well, the author of this book, Mark Allen Baker, is going to be joining us a little bit later. We do have a link to some of his works up on BillyCBoxing.com, so check it out. I'm looking forward to talking to Mark about Lou Ambers, so he'll be coming up on the show. I'm going to give you an update on Mike Tyson and Jake Paul, as well as a breakdown and prediction on this weekend's fight between Tim Tszyu and Bakram Murtazolev, who's putting his title on the line to fight Tim Tszyu. But first, let's get talking about the fight results. This fight, okay, there's been a lot of discussion about it. First of all, I'll give you the result. Artur Beterbiev won the fight with a split decision, it's a one judge had it 114, 114, and the other two had it. It was a majority decision. I'm sorry, and the other two had it 115, 113, 116, 112. Hold that thought because I'm going to give you my scorecard on that, and we'll focus on that fight here in a minute. But the rest of the card, IBF cruiserweight champ Jay Opatia, he's now 26-0 with a draw. I'm sorry, I'm jumping the gun. I'm looking ahead to the Ben Whitaker fight. Opatia stopped Jack Macy to improve to 26-0 with 20 knockouts, defending his IBF World Cruiserweight title. I'll tell you something. The Macy's corner threw in the towel in round 6 at 2 minutes. I tell you, Opataya really looked good in this fight. And I had my doubts with this particular one because Macy went the distance with Joseph Parker, and he looked so much bigger than Opataya. And it just, I was very impressed. And, I tell you guys all the time how much I like the cruiserweight division. And it just seems that a lot of people here in the States don't follow it as much. But this fight is an example of why I liked it so much. Also, in a rematch, which, listen, the first fight was outrageous between Fabio Wardley and Frazier Clark. And everybody was clamoring for a rematch, and we got it this past weekend. The only thing is, it did not go as well as the first one. Fabio Wardley scored a first round. Heard it right. First round knockout over Frazier Clark after their fight in March was a draw. The official time was 2 minutes and 28 seconds of the first round. If you didn't see this fight, try and check out the video on it. Wardley crushed Frazier Clark with a solid right hand that you could see his face get broke. His orbital bone broke, his cheekbone, orbital bone, and you could see it. He was hurt. I tell you, the other thing I noticed about Frazier Clark in that particular fight was he didn't know what to do after he was hurt. He left himself wide open, and Wardley took advantage of it. Congratulations to him. Frazier Clark loses for the first time in his career. He's now 8 wins, 1 loss, 1 draw. 6 of his wins come up by knockout. Chris Eubank Jr. Improved to 34-3 with 25 knockouts when he stopped former world title challenger Camille Serramenda, who drops to 25 wins, 3 losses, and 2 draws, with 8 of his wins coming by knockout. The stoppage took place at 1 minute 50 seconds of the 7th round. And then the fight I jumped the gun on here. Ben Whitaker, who I'm pretty high on, and Liam Cameron, which I thought was going to be the biggest test to date for Whitaker. They started fighting, and it looked pretty good. It looked pretty even. And then all of a sudden, this freak accident happened. They both went tumbling over the ropes, and Whitaker couldn't continue with a leg injury. So they went to the scorecards by rule, and one judge had it 58-57 for Whitaker. One judge had it 58-57 for Cameron. And the other judge, as you would imagine, had it even at 58-58, resulting in a draw. So Whitaker now is 8 wins, no losses, 1 draw. 5 of his wins coming by knockout. And Cameron drops to 23-6-1 with 10 of his wins coming by knockout. Some of the post-fight discussions about this fight from Liam Cameron were, I kind of felt sorry for the guy because, he hasn't had anything handed to him, and he's been working hard. He's trying to right the ship. He had a couple of losses, a couple of negative things happen in his life personally, and he's building from the ground up. And his discussion after the fight was he felt he got robbed. I don't know about that. That seems to be a trend, which I'm going to get to here in a second. Female championship fight. Skylar Nicholson retained her title. She improves to 12-0 with a knockout, and she took care of Raven Chapman, who loses for the first time in her career, 9-1. 99-91 once, 98-92 twice. The fight itself, listen, I don't know if you knew this, but Raven Chapman was a sparring partner for Sky, and the fight looked like it was a sparring session to me. Raven Chapman had a decent jab, but she wasn't really letting it go a lot. And Nicholson, picked her shots and did enough to win. It was less than exciting. I'll just say that. In his pro debut, Mohamed Akiel won a 4-round decision over Jesus Gonzalez to go to 1-0. Gonzalez dropped to 3-3. All right, let's talk about the main event. Artur Beterbiev and Bivol. All right. So, I had a lot of hopes for this fight, and my initial opinion of the fight was that I got to be honest. Now, you know, um, give a shout out to my man Joel. Um, I got to be honest. I thought this fight was going to be a little more, and what I say by that, I mean a little more exciting. The fight was an example of two good fighters, and it was technical. It was a very technical fight, which I wasn't expecting, to be honest with you. With the style of Dmitry, I'm sorry, with the style of Artur Beterbiev, I thought that he would press the action a little more and force Bivol to do the same. Bivol, I expected to box and try to use his, which we all thought was superior boxing skill. At the end of the fight, um, you know, I, I scored the fight 115, 113 in favor of Artur Beterbiev. I had 7 of the 12 rounds. My notes, which are right here, I wrote close. Now, when I write close when I'm scoring a fight, that means it could go either way. Okay. So when I started seeing all the post fight comments, Bivol was robbed, he won this fight, blah, 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 blah. I'm saying to myself, what fight were people watching? If the same score that I had was 115, 113 in favor of Bivol, I wouldn't have said, it was a close fight. Some of the rounds I leaned towards Beterbiev. Maybe Bivol got on the judges' scorecard because that's all that matters. If the fight ended in a draw, which I saw a lot of people felt that it was, I wouldn't have argued. This is a kind of fight that no matter who you were rooting for or who you thought won, it was a close enough fight. The word robbery should not have been used by anyone in this fight. Now, how did the judges score it? One judge had it 115, 113, and one judge had it 116, 112 for Beterbiev, where the third had it even at 114, 114. So they were all in the same scope as I had it in the way I saw it. Here's some of the issues that I had with the fight, not the fighters with the fight. First of all, I like the zone. Okay, so I started out my day watching the fight on the zone, and they charged $19.99. So I figured, okay, I didn't think the fight was a pay-per-view, but I paid $19.99 to find out that the $19.99 here in the States was for the undercard, which kind of laid an egg. The undercard kind of laid an egg. I mean, the Ben Whitaker fight ending the way it did, and the Wardley Frazier Clark fight, being a blowout, and the Chris Eubank Jr. fight, thinking that it would have been more exciting than it was. I mean, Eubank dropped him early on. I figured the fight was going to be over quickly, but it wasn't. But it ended in a stoppage, and then Conor Ben shows up, and they start promoting their next fight, and it was like a WWE, right? But here's the thing. All along, while I'm watching it, the zone is talking about, give a shout out to my man Hawk, who I just noticed is in the chat room, all during the broadcast, which was decent. I liked when the main guys on the zone are doing it. I was never a real big fan of some of those guys, but I like the presentation. Okay, it's enjoyable, and it's they go over and over stuff, but it's enjoyable. Then all of a sudden, they put on this concert. Now, how many times have we and promoters have tried to mix music and boxing? Look, man, it doesn't work. People don't go to a boxing match and want to see a music, some live music, whether it be rap, rock, country, whatever, right? They just don't. And vice versa. You don't go to a concert hoping that you get to see a little boxing. It doesn't work. And, they break out a couple of let's just say, past their prime performers in Busta Rhymes and Missy Elliott, and I don't even know who the other woman was, but they were lip syncing. They were lip syncing. I understand it was the kickoff of riot season, and they wanted to have an extravaganza, um, and it doesn't work, right? But with that said, so now the concert's over, and I'm all ready to watch the main event, and then a thing comes up on my TV and says you got to switch over to ESPN Plus, right? I'm like, WTF, right? What do you mean I got to switch over to ESPN Plus? I have ESPN Plus, so I switch over, and what do I see? I see Timothy Bradley and Bernardo Osuna calling the fight from the studio. They're calling the fight from the studio. It sounded like they were calling the fight from the studio. It sounded canned. It was terrible. It was terrible. And not only was it terrible, they were terrible. I love Timothy Bradley. He's a knowledgeable guy, but it was terrible. And you know what was even worse? When you watch a football game or a baseball game and they start showing you the stats, right? They start bringing up the stats. Joe Schmo, at night games when he's batting from the right side against a pitcher who's a right-handed pitcher, he's batting, 283 with runners in scoring position. He's batting 386, and he's got all these statistics. Football, so-and-so's got he got the ball 10 times. He's got 112 yards already. He's running for, X amount of yards already per carry, right? They're statistics. They're facts. Football, baseball. I'm not a big fan of basketball and hockey, but they're stats. They're mathematical stuff that, 10 yards, 10 yards per carry. He's got 100 yards. 10 times 10 is 100. He gets up 10 times. He gets 5 hits. He's batting 500. That's a math, right? It's basic. These guys were bringing up statistics during this fight, and they were calling the fight based on the statistics. You've heard me say this a million times. But if you were watching and actually listening to Osuna and Timothy Bradley, you too would be saying that the fight was a robbery. They made it like there wasn't even you didn't even need to watch the result that Bivol won the fight, and they're throwing up all these stats, right? You got to remember, boys and girls, boxing stats, punch stats are subjective. There's a human being that's recording whether the punch was landed or not. He's recording, or she's recording, whether it was a power shot or not. And by the way, if it's a legitimate jab and it knocks the guy out, it's not considered a power punch. It's not on the statistics as a power punch. It's on the statistics as a jab. So right off the bat, listen, I don't mind bringing up the punch stats after the fight, okay? But these guys were talking about it so much. I mean, it was terrible, all right? It was terrible. Now, as far as the fight goes, I give credit to Beterbiev. He pushed the action. The reason why I gave him the nod on those close rounds was that he was pushing the action. He was the aggressor. And he landed the more meaningful punches, in my opinion. He landed the more meaningful punches. There was no doubt about that. Bivol was counterpunching well, and he was landing punches, but it started to look like Bivol was trying to steal the rounds. He was like trying to be a Sugar Ray Leonard against Marvin Hagler, try to steal those rounds. And, he was successful some of the time. But to me, and this was the first time I ever witnessed this with Bivol, I thought he was running out of gas. I thought that he was running out of gas. Now, granted, I read somewhere so on social media that Beterbiev only won the last 2 rounds. He didn't win the fight. Well, what are you talking about? He came on strong in the last 2 rounds. There's no question. As a matter of fact, I thought that Dmitry Bivol was running out of gas by the 10th round. I noticed it. All right. I noticed that he wasn't, getting out of the way. And that's when Beterbiev was connecting, and it seemed to be doing more damage. The broadcast crew of Bernard Osuna and and Bernardo Osuna and Timothy Bradley actually made the statement at the end of the fight, and they said it's clear that Bivol won the fight. I mean, just look at the two fighters. Who would you rather be? And I'm saying to myself, are they that far away in the studio that they can't see Bivol's face? Bivol's face was busted up. Artur Beterbiev didn't have a scratch on him. Didn't have a scratch on him. Are there going to be a rematch? There should be a rematch. You know why? Because both of these guys, I'm not sure how much money they've made throughout their career. I know that I know that Dmitry Bivol made a good payday when he fought Canelo Alvarez, and a lot of people were comparing the fight with Beterbiev, like his fight against Bivol's fight against Canelo. Except the difference was that he was not dominating the way he dominated Canelo. Beterbiev got in there and forced him to move. You got to give credit to Artur Beterbiev for cutting off the ring. He was moving, he was throwing punches, he didn't tire. One thing I want to make a point about is that they allowed that beard, Artur Beterbiev's beard. It was pretty long, all right? In a lot of commissions, most commissions in the United States, they allow beards now, but they have to be kind of close to the face. They wouldn't allow that here in the States. That beard would have had to have been trimmed. I think there's a rematch going to happen. I think it should happen. Then again, Artur Beterbiev really has nothing left to prove. He could ride off into the sunset right now if he wanted. And he's accomplished everything. He unified all the titles. He's undefeated. He went the distance for the first time in his career. Yeah, as you recall, my prediction last week was that if it went to the scorecards, that it would be, it would go to Bivol because I thought Beterbiev would win by knockout. So I give him credit for staying the course. The game plan for him seemed to work better. He did what a lot of us thought he would do by coming out being aggressive. And Bivol's boxing skill did present some trouble for Beterbiev. But at the end of the day, my scorecard 115, 113, I think was accurate. I've heard people comment calling it a robbery and everything else. I do not think it was a robbery in any stretch of the imagination. Now, if they have a rematch, who do I think is going to win? Well, look, Beterbiev could have very well aged before us. He didn't look it. But to tell you the truth, I think I would lean towards Bivol in the rematch. I think that he saw what Beterbiev is going to give him, and in the rematch, Beterbiev would do the same thing. That's what he does. I think Bivol, and we talked about this last week, I think Bivol underestimated the boxing ability of Artur Beterbiev. I really do. I think he underestimated. I think he was expecting him to come all out and headhunt, and he was hoping to be able to counterpunch him and move out of harm's way, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that, once he realized that Beterbiev was able to cut the ring off and pretty much neutralize Bivol's boxing attack. Now, I'm not going to say he neutralized his boxing ability because he didn't, but he neutralized Bivol's attack. Every time Bivol would come in, his most success that he had was counterpunching and throwing multi-punch combinations in this fight. But Beterbiev's ring generalship got him out of the way, or he was able to unleash some hard punches himself to stop Bivol's boxing attack. The result was correct, in my opinion. I do not think that that Bivol won the fight. I wouldn't have argued if he did. To me, it was that close. Like I said, I gave 7 rounds. I marked on my notes 7 rounds were extremely close. So I had rounds 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, and 9, all close, could have gone either way. All of those rounds could have gone either way, in my opinion. And if you scored it the opposite of me, you would have had Bivol winning the fight. But in my opinion, I gave those close rounds to the aggressor. I gave the close rounds to the guy pressing the action, and I gave the closer rounds to the guy that landed the more meaningful punches. And in my opinion, that was Artur Beterbiev, and he won the fight. Rematch, yeah, I think they're going to have a rematch. It makes financial sense, and I predicted Beterbiev. You guys heard me, but I do believe that a rematch favors Bivol. And I think that the time frame, we wouldn't see this fight for 6 months. It's going to put 6 months, 6 months more of Father Time on Artur. And we all know Father Time's undefeated. And I just think that I think we'll get to see Dmitry Bivol's superior boxing skill in the rematch. I think he'll respect the boxing ability of Beterbiev more. Like I said, I think his game plan was to counterpunch and outbox Artur Beterbiev, but he underestimated his boxing ability. And like I told you guys last week, when we had my man John Iceman Scully on here, who's a co-trainer for Artur, he pointed it out. And I went back and watched video, and of course, John was right. Beterbiev has a very substantial and decent jab. And a lot of us, including myself, until, he awakened me on that, I overlooked it because of 20 wins, 20 knockouts. Of course, you overlook the jab, right? But now he's 21 with 20 knockouts. So maybe you can't overlook it. Hey, I was talking about this great book, Lou Amber's book. Lou Amber's one of my favorite fighters. And I couldn't wait. Once I started reading this book, I reached out to my man, Mark Allen Baker, who is the author of this book. And he's joining us right now. And Mark's with us now. Mark, how you doing?
Good, Billy. How are you?
Good. I'm having a little trouble hearing you. I don't know if that was on my side or yours. Yeah, you're totally no sound coming out of you now. So check your make sure you're not muted there. And yeah, you have there's a little microphone button. Make sure there's not an X in it. We had your sound there at first, but now I didn't.
Huh? You sure you can't hear anything, huh?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Is it on your end?
Yeah, no, I hear you better now.
Okay, good.
All right, good. How you doing, my man?
Fantastic. Thank you for having me on this afternoon.
Hey, I appreciate your time, and I wanted to talk about your book. I got it right here. And first of all, my first question is, well, what made you write it? First of all, you have so many great books, and I'll point everybody to that when we're done. But what made you write about Lou Ambers?
This one was something that it was close to the heart. Number one, my wife is from the area, is from the Mohawk Valley.
Hey, Mark, try and turn your volume up. I think your mic is a little low.
Okay, let me see if I can get it to.
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
I don't understand what it is.
Yeah, you're getting louder, so I think you might be.
Okay, if I just get close to the screen.
Yeah, maybe it's just the distance. Yeah.
Okay.
What made you write about Lou?
Well, first off, it's my wife is from the Mohawk Valley, and so I had heard for years about Lou Ambers, and obviously knew about him when
Mark, you started out real good, and you're getting a little low. I can hardly hear you. So maybe I don't know. Do you have a mic on the computer? Is there an adjustment you can make on the volume? Oh, these guys are telling me they hear you fine. Okay, all right. Well, if you're hearing them fine, then go ahead.
Okay.
What made you write?
Well, first off, my wife's from the Mohawk Valley. I obviously knew a lot about Lou Ambers. as a kid growing up. I was being raised in New York State. So I had heard for years about Lou Ambers. And when I finally met my wife, she said, I'm from the Mohawk Valley. And I said, oh, home to Lou Ambers. And she's like, oh, yeah, everybody knows Lou Ambers. Her mother worked at the Herkimer County Historical Society. And as the years passed and I wrote books, I finally got to a point where I said, I'm going to shoot myself if I don't write about him because I want to know more. And everybody knows about him. Every time I'm in the area, everybody asks me about him. My wife had family friends who were friends of Lou's, and so it was a love affair. I mean, I wanted to write the book, and I wanted to learn about Lou Ambers, and what an incredible journey. I'm so proud to have the opportunity to do it.
Okay, I got some questions on Lou Amber. First of all, he didn't really have a long amateur career, and it seems to me that he just had the natural ability because I mean he's one of the. And it's another question I have for you. Tell us about. I know he was fighting in some of those smokers, and I love the way you described in the book because I had a gym in Poughkeepsie, right? And I learned about that area. Like Sugar Ray Robinson would come up for smokers from Harlem in the backseat of a rumble, in the rumble seat of a car, And so when you started describing how those smokers were in upstate New York, I was like, it hooked me right there. What was his amateur career like?
Incredible. First off, he boxed under the name Otis Paradise. That was his name. And he once his father passed away, the family needed money. And I don't know if people are aware of it as much as I am, and maybe some of the people from New York State are, is that there used to be a Federation of Amateur Sports Clubs. And there was a guy out of Kingston, New York, Carl Studer, who acted as a matchmaker for a lot of the clubs. He was feeding fighters into Binghamton. He was feeding fighters all over New York State, Rochester, Syracuse, and he was running these smokers. And Lou caught on to him, and Lou would actually ride the rails and perform his Otis Paradise. And he had quite a few. I think about 60 amateur bouts that he fought. I put the most of them, minus maybe a dozen or so, in the book. At the end of the book, I have his official record, but I also document a lot of his fights as Otis Paradise. So that's where he picked up his knowledge, is those smokers.
So they were his amateur career were basically smoker events and not like an organized USA boxing type of a thing.
Now that ended up being, a lot of people were making a lot of money. A lot of these fighters were going town to town boxing under different names.
Right.
So
right.
You would have, Killer Johnson over here and Killer Smith over here fighting in Binghamton or Syracuse or wherever. And finally, there was a bill passed. The New York State legislature caught on and actually was passed a bill in 1933 to get all these clubs underneath the New York State Athletic Commission. And
eventually that's when they came out years later with the federal IDs, so they couldn't fight 1 week under Joe Smith and the next week under Jack Johnson. But I got one of my guys in the chat room, John Muscunis. He's actually works with Don King. He said he's commenting. He says he went to Fayetteville Monolith High School, the same high school that Lou Ambers went. He wants to know what year Lou graduated. He thinks he was a classmate, I think. I don't know.
I don't recall the year Lou graduated. I did a whole chapter. I'm sure it's in there. Obviously, I've done a lot of books. This was about 7 books ago, so my memory is a little bit in the background. But he had a wonderful, it brings to mind the high school there in Herkimer High School, actually had a teacher that was very, very impactful on the students at school, and her name was Margaret Tuger. And if you talk to anybody in Herkimer whose grandparents grew up during that time frame, everybody knew Margaret. And there's so many great stories about her. And she was always after little Luigi. And of course, Lou's a real name for people who don't know, is Luigi Giuseppe D'Ambrosio. And she was always after little Louie. And she had a paddle, and she used to paddle all of her students. And that paddle still exists, and it's at the Historical Society. That's how important that became.
That's cool. You know, one of the things that always attracted me to Lou Ambers was the fact that Rocky Marciano, and specifically his father, was a big fan of Lou Ambers. And, that's what made me want to learn about the guy. You know, I'm like, well, Rocky Marciano loved him. Tell us about that.
Well, first off, they had the same manager, Al Whale, who has also got connections here to Connecticut. Al, as most people know, Al handled 4 champions. He handled Lou, he handled Joey Archibald, he handled Lou's cousin, Marty Servino, and he also handled, of course, the great Rocky Marciano. So, I mean, obviously, they worked together, and Lou actually worked with Rocky for a while, and Lou was good friends with Jack Dempsey for a long time too. But Al Whale was his connection. Al was what got Lou up the elevator. I mean, obviously, Al had tremendous connections. He was matchmaker twice in the Garden with Mike Jacobs. A lot of people know that. Lou knew that Al had these connections and knew that Al could get him where he had to be, and he had a good trainer by the name of Charlie Goldman. And he had the pieces. The problem Lou faced was he was from Herkimer, New York. And the other fighters of that era, the 4 big guys, and everybody knows them: Barney Ross, Jimmy McLarnin, Tony Canzanieri, and Lou Ambers. And the problem there was always, well, you got 3 good matches. I mean, Ambers fought hard to get in the mix. That's the biggest problem he had attaining a championship, is getting in the mix. I mean, he was Canzaneri's sparring partner. That helped.
Yeah, one of my questions here, I wanted to ask about the Henry Armstrong fights. They were both great fights, and they were talking about a third fight that never took place. Was there any reason why the third fight never took place?
A lot of it, I don't think Al Whale at that time wanted Lou to fight. Obviously, he won against Armstrong the first time. He lost his title his first time. I think a lightweight ever won and lost to the same guy, if I'm not mistaken. But Al didn't want him to fight. He didn't want him to fight at that point, and that was part of it. And the other part of it is, I don't think Armstrong was too keen on it as well. And I go into quite a bit of detail on all this in the book. So if anybody's really interested in that specifically, that's covered in detail. Also, Lou didn't really care for Armstrong's. I mean, they're the same size, but didn't care for Armstrong's style of fighting also. I mean, as you know, Armstrong was, close quarters fighter, and a damn good one. And he was also, let's not to be too hard, dirty fighter. And Lou didn't really care for that style. Lou moved about. He was a traveling type boxer, and he was very good at it. I mean, he learned a lot of that from Canzanieri and a lot of his predecessors.
Well, the second fight that he had with Armstrong, there was so many low blows. I think they awarded him 5 or 6 rounds for low blows, right? Something like that.
It was ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it was a dirty fight. I mean, and it just made no sense at that. He didn't want to. He certainly didn't want to fight him again. The money was there, but I don't think he wanted. At that point, you got to remember. I mean, he was pushing for something a little bit different, and of course, that's when he met Lou Jenkins, and Jenkins at that time was top of his game.
He retired after the rematch on that fight, but. So an interesting thing about Lou Ambers that I see is, 89 wins, right? He only had 8 losses in which he was only stopped twice. He did have 7 draws, but he was descriptions of Lou Ambers he was a vicious fighter. He only had 28 KOs. What was the reasoning behind that? I can't believe that the guy didn't have pop behind his punches. Was it just a different time, or what's your thoughts on that?
I think it's a different time. I really do. He didn't have the pop. Obviously, everybody wants to see the knockout, and he was criticized as usual for not having it and for not having the knockout wins. But thankfully, a lot of that dissipated, and we'll thank Mr. Pett for a lot of that, or bringing a lot of that defensive fighting attitude to boxing. But he got, if you go through and read the papers, he was criticized heavily for not having the pop on his punches. But you got to remember who he was up against. I mean, holy cow. I mean, Jenkins at the time. And I mean, you got guys floating around like Jenkins and Bummy Davis and guys who really could hit. And Lou wasn't, I hate to say, but he didn't have it. He would wear people down and move and counterpunch.
I tell you, when the names that stuck out for me, Al Bummy Davis, Henry Armstrong, Baby Arzamendi, Paul Jr., Tony Canzanari, like you mentioned, Davey Day, Fritzy Zivic, the Coco Kid, all big names, and which brings me to a question. When people are talking about all-time greats, you very rarely hear his name. Why is that? It drives me crazy.
I know, and I'd like to hear it. The problem is, well, you got a lot of really good fighters who, that's the key. I mean, who are you going to pull when you look at? I'll use Bert Sugar's top 100 for example. I mean, and I think Lou's in there, but I mean, you start looking at, he's just. I think part of it had to do was he wasn't a big market fighter, because I mean, if you look at those big four, McLaren got away with murder. Ross got away. Ross never followed any of the rules as far as when he should fight and defend a title. And Canzaneri had the New York market locked up. And I mean, Canzaneri should have fought Ambers, I mean, a long time ago. I mean, and he should have actually, he was having the politics involved were just horrible. And Al fought him as much as he could, but I think it was just the fact that Herkimer is not a major fight market and it's not downstate. I really think that.
The funny thing is a lot of those names, with the exception of Henry Armstrong that I just mentioned, they're not mentioned when people are talking all-time greats either, which is ridiculous. They are all-time. And you mentioned Barney Ross a couple of times. I thought Barney Ross and Lou Ambers were very similar, in the way they fought and the way they're not being recognized today. They never did fight, though, did they?
No, they didn't. And I wish they could have. They had a lot of opportunities, but it didn't land. I mean,
isn't that kind of unusual, Mark, that during that era that those two guys, especially, they were at the top of the game together. I mean, I wonder why they didn't fight. Was it just a money thing or what?
I think it was money. I think it was logistics. When you go back and the one good thing about my book is when they sign contract, instead of like the Ring Record book where you're going down, okay, here's all the fighters and here's when they fought. On the back of my books, I always put, okay, if they signed a fight and they were supposed to fight, I always put that in the back of the book so that people know, okay, well, why didn't he? That's a good question. Well, I don't have the book in front of me, but if they signed a fight and they were scheduled to have a fight, then it was in the book that they signed, and then it came the terms, and the terms were always the things that hung up the fights. I mean, you'd make a match, sure, but that was a hell of a lot easier than getting these fighters to agree on terms. A lot of it had to do with weight, had to do with, percentage of the door, money up front, forfeits. I mean, the list is endless. And these guys, I mean, at that time, the four of them had it made. And the big, I mean, everybody, I mean, think of the, back then they were marketing ethnicity. And so when you get Ross and Canzaneri, that's a fantastic match. You get McLaren fighting either one of those guys. That's a fantastic match. The other thing is that I don't think these New York matchmakers thought Ambers brought a lot to the pie, brought a lot of the following that Canzaneri had. So it was safer going with Canzaneri.
Isn't it amazing when you look at the sport during that era and you look at the sport during this era? I always think of Mike Silver and the book that he wrote. It was called the Rise and Fall of the Sweet Science or something like that. And he points out about the amount of licensed fighters just in New York State alone during this era. It was in the thousands compared to today. It's a couple hundred, which is I think it's indicative of the amount of fights that these guys had and who they fought. And it just bothers the hell out of me that a lot of younger fans today don't even know who they are.
That's true. In one of my books, I'm almost certain I put the exact number of people who were licensed before and after World War II. And I think before the number is over 4,000 that were actually licensed in New York State. But you got to remember too, they were teaching boxing in school. And there was a greater support system for boxing back then. And then once you see, the kids get attracted to the big money, and it helps if they learn early. And I think if we taught, I'm an advocate for teaching boxing in high school. I really believe there wouldn't be the bullying. There was never bullying when people learned how to fight in high school. People learned quickly that a feather could beat a light, and a light could beat a light heavy, and a light heavy could beat a heavy if they knew how to box and defend themselves. And I think we've lost a lot there. And naturally, over the years, look at Connecticut. Connecticut shut down for 10 years when they outlawed boxing in the 60s. And it killed all the fighters, killed all the clubs, killed all the gyms. And how Marlon Starling stuck it out and ended up rising to the top when it was finally legalized in Connecticut, thank God. But you were fighting so much of outside the ring that was not helping the ring develop at all.
You mentioned Marlon Starling, good friend of mine, and why he's not in the Hall of Fame just drives me crazy. But you brought up his name, and every time I hear his name or people are talking about the Hall of Fame, it's like I get so PO'd that he's not in it. But that's a whole nother story. But one of the things I think that contributes to your point is back in those days, boxing was, it was a trade. Okay. You ended up as a kid in a gym. Maybe you start sweeping the floors, you learn to box a little bit, you fight in the amateurs, you become a pro, whether you were successful or not, whatever the case is, you run through that career as a pro. And then you end up as a trainer and you're teaching other kids, and the cycle just continued. Well, I see us today not having those trainers, those teachers. We have rah-rah men. And one of the problems I see with the sport of boxing is that there's no regulation on who can be a trainer or who could be a second or something. All you need is $25 or $50, whatever the license fee is for that state, and poof, you're the main trainer for that fight. You don't know a left hook from a fish hook, but yet you're the guy in the corner, and you can almost sense it when you hear the discussions that, or lack of, that's going on in the corner in the heat of a fight. There's no instruction. I've heard them say the most ridiculous things like, don't get hit or stay away from the punch. It's like the fighter's probably sitting there going, yeah, I know I don't need to get hit. How do I avoid it? Do you think it could ever come back? Because I think a lot of the problem could be the parents. They don't want little Johnny to box because they have the misconception that, he could get hurt. I remember us on this show, we followed up. I was involved in a study on concussion, and everybody thought that boxing had the highest concuss rate, and it doesn't. Football does by a long shot. And because boxing, if you're being taught correctly, you're avoiding the punches. You're trying to avoid being hit. In a sport like football, you're launching yourself to tackle. Do you think education could help it, or do you think it's just a negative feel towards the sport?
I think there's a lot of misinformation. I definitely agree with that. I see it when I write all the time. And that's why a lot of the times with my books, I don't use other books because the other books are wrong. And we've learned that over the years. We have more access to information now, and we can correct some of our own history. But I think on the point of trainers and corner, there should be qualifications for those people. There should be job summaries. It's nice, but you look around, they're all friends of the fighter. What are they going to say? Hey, buddy, you're not doing it. Sometimes they do. We're fortunate to have some good trainers. They exist. I like my buddy McGirt. I like John Scully. Obviously, he's from Connecticut. And I don't know. I wish there was more to it. I think there's a lot we can do. But even those good trainers are going to admit that there should be some qualifications with the corner people. Definitely.
Yeah. Those two you just mentioned are, in my opinion, tops. John, of course, and Buddy McGirt. I say it all the time, and I don't understand why fighters aren't lined up outside their doors trying to get them involved. I think because they're no nonsense businesses, boxing as a business is their thing, and I think some of these young fighters they like. I'll use the term the bling. They like the shiny, and they're going towards that versus somebody who's technically sound.
Oh, very true. Very, very true. I agree with you on that. No question.
What makes you? You got so many books. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna stick up a thing here. It's gonna go over you here for a minute, but you got all this stuff. I'm looking now. I don't know if you can see, but Battling Nelson, Tony Canzonori. You got Willie Pep, Kilbane, and of course the Amber's book. I mean, what drives you to do these? I mean, I love it, because I love the historical aspect, and I turned off a lot of young viewers and listeners when we were real in our heyday with this show. We've been doing it now 21 years, and I kind of got a little uptight with them for their lack of interest in the historical aspect of the sport. But I think these fighters are so important to what we're seeing today. What's your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely agree. I'm driven. A lot of this comes back from, I don't know, some people know I've been associated with the International Boxing Hall of Fame since they started. And in the early days, the people that were writing all the background information, Herb Goldman, Hank Kaplan, myself, Ed, and maybe a couple others in between. As I started researching these, we'll start with Battling Nelson. He wrote an autobiography. It ends in 1908, but he didn't die for like 40 years later. So I'm like, what the heck happened to this guy? Last time when his autobiography ends, he's at the White House. Well, this ends up being a rags to riches to rags story. Here's a guy that had dinner with Theodore Roosevelt and ended up dumpster diving for his dinner before he passed away. And I'm like, I want to know the whole story. And then from there, my father played professional baseball in the minor leagues in the 50s. I always heard stories of, like everybody, Joe Jackson, and I wanted to know Abe Attell. So I'm working at the International Boxing Hall of Fame. I said, where's all the information on the Attell boys? There's 3 of them that fought. There was nothing. So I said, perfect opportunity. Plus I like baseball, and I can maybe straighten some people out with regard to his participation in the Black Sox scandal. And it just grew from there. And then it was Amber's, because being an upstate New York resident and knowing so much about Lou Ambers and hearing his name. And Willie Pep, when I finally moved to Connecticut, I spent a lot of time with Willie Pep. I spent a whole day with him. Ed Brophy called me up one day. He said, I got Willie coming in. He said, I can't give him any time. Will you spend the whole day with him? Okay, Eddie, I'll come up. I said, how am I going to keep him busy? He said, interview him. It was the best idea I ever had. I thankfully put it on tape. And so I have that as well. And I learned a lot of, Willie was so helpful to me. Very, very, I've been lucky. I've met almost everybody and that I've ever dreamed of wanting in boxing and more. The list is endless. Breakfast with Bo Jack, breakfast with, the whole day with Willie, chatting with Jimmy McLarnin, talking to Billy Kahn, Jersey Joe Walcott. I got a lot of firsthand experience. Some of them came in my restaurant. I had a restaurant at that time in upstate New York. And a lot of them came in the restaurant when they were in town. So I got a lot of good stories, and a lot I found out through them. A lot of these people were overlooked. They'll agree with us, Billy, totally. These guys like Ambers, like Attell, like a new guy that I'm just, and I have a new book after Kilbane. Kilbane's one that needed a comprehensive biography, but I just finished a book on Jack Dillon, the great fighter.
I saw that. I was like, oh my God, there's no book. That's the only book on him, right? There's not another book out on him. Yeah.
There's been nothing on anybody. The Canzoneri book came out before another biography I knew somebody was working on followed it, but that took a different slant, and I took a different slant on purpose. And there's some things I didn't bring up. I didn't bring up all the garden politics and what I thought about certain things, because I wasn't sure if that book would ever come out. And my Canzoneri book if it was his only biography, I wanted to tell a good story. A good story. Boxing has enough bad stories. We need some good stories. And that's what I'm trying to do, dig these up. Now, they're different. Okay, Abe Patel. Okay, that's not a clean story, and neither is Jack Dillon when it's over and done with. But there are some good stories like Lou Ambers being such a great person. And I always liked Willie. He was always a favorite. Whether Ghost in the Closet with Willie, well, yeah, well, quite a few. But I only put in my books what I can prove, Billy. It's not theory. I mean, it's not like going through Undisputed Truth by Tyson and there's no notes. No notes. It's just whatever Mike's opinion is. And Mike's a historian. I'm not knocking him for it, but I think there's value in being able to prove what you say.
I agree. I agree with that, and I think that the other problem is when you're going back in time, and I know I had this issue when I was writing my little book. You can only go to newspaper articles, and for me it was even harder. But that's the problem I see today. A lot of the younger people aren't willing to do that research. I mean, I can't imagine how many hours that you spend going through old newspapers, because that's the only place you're going to find the information. And the way they used to write about these fights is you'd have to see several articles about the same fight to get the full gist of that fight. Because if the fight was taking place in upstate New York, of course, the article that you're going to read about Lou Ambers is all going to be it's going to sound like a different fight from the guy who wrote it, who's from Chicago, So, and you got to weed it out as the author. I get it. And I think that's where the void is, because a lot of younger people don't want to put that time and effort in. They want to watch a video clip and they'll make their quick judgment on it. Like people have commented to me about Jack Johnson. I have him in my top 10 all-time heavyweights, and people will tell me, I watch video, he doesn't look fast, he doesn't look, and I'm like, the video of him was in the early 1900s. One guy was cranking a camera outside. I mean, you can't get the full gist of how he fought by that grainy video from the turn of the century in 1900. You have to read about this stuff, and they just don't seem willing to do that.
No, it takes. Well, first off, each book takes about a year. Also, I get up at 1:30 in the morning and don't go to bed till 7 at night. And the whole time is boxing. That's it. I mean, I used to laugh at Hank Kaplan when he used to tell me how much time he spent. I spend more. And
Hank,
over the years.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but one time I ran into Hank at an event. I don't know. It might have been at Foxwoods or whatever. And I was talking to him and he amazed me, right? And I asked him, I wanted to learn about this fighter, and my mind is going. I can't even think of the guy's name, but I asked Hank about it, and he says, Hank with he had his the same shirt he always had on with his stuffed in his pocket, and he says to me, here, write your name down on this piece of paper, because I made the mistake of saying, oh, here's my email. And he said, no, just write your name down on a piece of paper. I have some stuff for him. James Elliott was the fighter I was asking him about. And he says, he goes, here, write your address on here. And I figured that was going to be the last that I heard from him. About a month later, I get this manila envelope in the mail. And he took the time, Hank Kaplan took the time to go in and make me copies of everything that he had on James Elliott. And James Elliott was he was fought in that era where you claimed to be the champ and you were the champ if somebody had to beat you. And he had just come out of jail. He only fought, I think, 4 professional fights or whatever. And he sent me everything on this guy. And I never forgot that. And those kind of people aren't around anymore, my man.
No, they're not. And going back to what you said previously, the no decision era, I've covered that. I like that era because I do the research. But in some of my books, I'll list during a no decision fight 10 pros and 10 cons for different newspaper sources, so that you can see for yourself and make your own judgment. but I spend the time, and I mean, I read everything, everything, and a good book. And yeah, the books are expensive, and yeah, but I mean, the official record at the end, I mean, I give you an official record. I give you everything you wanted to know: superstitions, pets, diversions, fights that were canceled, fights that were signed, fights that should have been. I even go into detail about a lot of it. And yeah, it takes some time. And yeah, in some cases, they're a little bit dry. I understand that. But the important thing is you're paying for a product, and that product should be thorough. And I should cover every one of Willie Pep's fights because I have to verify them. And if you go back and look at my books and match them with boxing record, mine are totally different in some cases. I mean, not with the base fights, but I've found other fights. I mean, I've talked to Bob Yellen about this for years, about picking up on fights, finding fights in different sources, look at Lou Ambers is digging out all the Otis Paradise fights. That's not easy, and all those New York State, that whole New York State era that you mentioned, which is so big. It's such a big part of boxing. Nobody knows about it. And I put a directory, Billy. I put a directory because I've heard so many people at the Hall of Fame during the weekend say, "Oh, my father fought in Smokers," and I'm like, "Really?" And so I can look up over 100 names that I found of those amateur fighters riding the rails, and they would get paid naturally. If they're a bootleg fighter, they're going to get a few bucks and line their pockets. But at least I covered it. It's a good part of boxing history. And you go back to Jack Johnson. What about the world, colored heavyweight championship? I did a whole book on that because there was nothing on that.
Yeah, that was the basis of my argument about Tom Molyneux, about that whole colored thing, because that's a different story. But one thing I did want to talk to you about, and I appreciate the book on New York, upstate New York stuff. But I promoted fights here in the Lake George area, and there was a resort here called Roaring Brook Ranch, and the owner of that, we tried to do an event there, but the New York State Athletic Commission wouldn't approve the venue for whatever reason. But the reason why he wanted to do it was because his father, it was one of these resorts handed down generations.
Sure.
He finally sold it, but his father kept telling him that Max Baer had trained at the Roaring Brook. So I did a little research myself, and I couldn't find anything that mentioned that. But Gene Tunney had started the training facility up in the Adirondacks, and a lot of people during that era, including Max Baer, were reported to have been training up in the Adirondacks. Now, if you recall, that time too, when they had when they got sick from tuberculosis, they would all come up here to be able to breathe better and everything else. Did you ever come across anything about that in the Adirondacks?
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge part of history. And I covered some of it when I did a book on Connecticut fighters, and I include Tunney, and I mentioned that. And for those who don't recall, Gene Tunney lived the last 49 years of his life in Connecticut. So I've done a lot of work with Gene, and believe it or not, and this is really going to age me, I used to write back and forth to Gene Tunney, and that's when I was a young kid. So, I mean, that really ages me, but that whole Adirondack situation, and my wife takes her father up there quite a bit, up your way. And there's so much history in there, so much. And that's a great book right there. Great book.
I know.
The Adirondack stuff.
I started flipping through it, and I'm like, it got me totally sidetracked, But one of the guys, New York guy, you mentioned the International Boxing Hall of Fame. And Carmen Basilio always pops into my head, and I had the luxury of meeting him and talking with him, and actually a couple events I attended, him and his wife were there, and they were like a comedy. They were like a comedy act, those two, and it was just so fun to be around them.
Yeah, Josie, she was a fire plug. I mean that in a nice way, by the way.
No, I totally get it, and
how can you not love Carmen Basilio? I mean,
seriously. No, I know.
If you're from upstate New York, the first time I saw him when I was a kid at the mall. I'm like, you're Carmen Basilia. I couldn't believe he was walking with his wife. He was walking into the mall. I'm like, aren't you Carmen Basilia? Yeah. I'm like, you're Carmen Basilia. And I was a kid. I mean, I was a high school kid, and I was blown away that here's Carmen Basilia. The guy was on the front of Life magazine, talking with that deep voice. Years later, I had a couple stores. He did some signings in some stores, and of course, I spent a lot of time with him in Canastota. And I love him. I mean, I covered him. The Titletown book that you reference is because I was a volunteer at the museum, and everybody, Billy, came in, asked the same questions. Well, what's the story with, Billy Backus? And what's the story with Carmen Basilio? And what's the story with the, Ray Robinson and Carmen? How did that interchange? And what's the story about this upstate New York? And why is it Canastota? And what's the whole story? How did that all start? So that's why I did Titletown, because I was sick of answering all those questions,
Yeah.
So
you
I
pretty much answered them all in that book. But yeah, so I got my man John is reminding me of a story that I want to share with you. So I went and did when Baby Joe Macy, another upstate New York guy, when he was in his heyday, I did this big interview with him, and I spent some time with him in Buffalo. And we met at an event where it was a fundraiser for the Hall of Fame. And I brought this guy with me who worked for me at the time. And he was a big kid, big guy. I mean, 6'2" and just as wide as he was tall, but he was a monster guy. All right. So here we are at this event, and Carmen is there. Carmen Basilio and Josie and a bunch of other people were there. Bert Sugar was there, and anyway, so Eric wanted to get everybody's autograph. So he goes up and he gets Carmen Basilio's autograph, and Carmen Basilio says to him, "Here, bend over." Right. So he puts that. He puts the thing on his back, and he signs it on his back, and he says. Hey, you're a big kid. He's saying to Eric, right? And he goes, hey, and he puts his hands up, and Eric puts his hands up because you got to watch out for the right, and he's sitting there, and Eric said, all of a sudden, Carmen slaps him.
Oh,
it was more of a punch with his left. And he's right in Eric's face, and Eric looks back, and he says, "You got to watch the left too." He says to the guy, and I'll never forget it. It was just, it was comical, but that's the way the guy was. He was, and I think that to be honest with you, Mark, I think that's what's missing in boxing today. We don't have those characters anymore.
Characters,
because they're not allowed to be characters. They only fight 3 times a year, and then they win Fighter of the Year award. They all try to self-promote. They all rip a pay. I'm gonna do this to you, all this stuff. It turns me off because it's not legit. Muhammad Ali did it. Doesn't mean everybody else can. So we need more characters. How can we make that happen?
Well, good point. I mean, that's character development's kind of out of my league here, but anyway, that's a good point. But it brings up some good things, I miss a lot of that, but I go back to this, and here's my question for you is I get a lot of heat, and I'm not a voter for the International Boxing Hall of Fame, and they get a lot of heat. How come so-and-so's not? Where's the qualifications? We have guys in the museum, inductees, that box the same amount of time or less than people like Johnny Dundee fought in 1 year. 1 year. At least you can laugh at the Baseball Hall of Fame, right? But they've got 3,000 hits. They got 300 wins. They've got some measurements. We need something at some point. I really think so. And we need to broaden our horizon, not to make mistakes, and to give more people. There's a lot of people, judges, some really good judges that should be in the hall, some really good trainers, cut men, some great, the Far East fighters. Everybody with a new ballot. Pone Kingpin is finally on the ballot. The Far Eastern fighters, the Cuban fighters. We need to kind of fine tune a little bit. I think.
I agree. There's a lot of fighters that should be in that aren't, and you can't just go by records. Some of the newer generation fighters that are going in, I get turned off by it. And the thing is I used to be more critical than I am now. And I look at the physical attributes of human beings now, and the truth of the matter is that based on physical, we're bigger, we're stronger, we're nutritional wise, we know what to eat, what not to eat. So theoretically, you would think that we would have the best fighters ever out there today, but we don't. And the reason I believe is the fact that, and just how a lot of fans look at that O. They equate a quality fighter with the O. They don't look at who they fought. He's undefeated, so he must be good. That's the attitude. I've had arguments, and it's turned me off. It made me stop doing the show for a year, to be honest with you, because people would try to, I tried not to mention his name today, but I have to because of this conversation. But they try to tell me that Floyd Mayweather Jr. was a better fighter than Sugar Ray Robinson, and they used the double-digit losses for Sugar Ray Robinson as their ammo, right? And I said, look, it was a different era back then, and they fought more often. You look at the resume, and they're fighting 3 times a month. Yeah, they're not fighting knockout, drag out, top-notch opposition 3 times a month, but they're fighting those level fights 6 times a year. And you're looking at fighters of today who's fighting 3 times a year, and they're not even fighting quality fighters in their own, you're seeing fights now. You see, he's fighting a champion. Yeah, but the champion's moving up 2 weight classes to fight him. The edge is always with the A side. And I just, until boxing fans say no, they're going to keep being fed this. The problem is they're afraid to say no because we're teetering on outlawing the sport. They have been for all these years. It's a shame. It's a shame. And I don't have the answer. I thought I did years ago, and it just seems to be getting worse. And I watched these fighters, even I watched the card this past weekend, and I was looking forward to the heavyweight fight that was on that card with Fabio Wardley and Frazier Clark. And it wasn't as exciting, obviously, as the first one. And at the end of the fight, they stick a microphone in Wardley's face, and what does he say? I want to fight for a world title. And I'm saying, this guy's not ready for a world title. He just fought a good fight against a similar level opponent. What happened to climbing the ladder? What happened to the number 10 guy fighting the number 9 guy? And then the winner of that fights the number 8 guy. And you get up to the number 1 guy, and then he fights the champion. What happened to that?
Yeah, good point. But you bring up good things there. Fight frequency is key. Fight frequency helped build markets too, market exposure. I mean, right now, you look at the kids. I mean, part of the reason the kids of the 50s and 60s love boxing so much, it was available on TV, ABC, Wild World of Sports. We know, Friday Night Fights, all that. A lot of these guys went into markets. They created personas for themselves, and it really helped them out. And they became marketable, and they got a following, and that development and building and fighting in those certain markets where you're strong, where you get people like Carmen Basilio are loved in upstate New York because he fought so many times there and grew up there. And yeah, I miss that, and it's not there. I mean, you've got to look now to the big casinos, and those have got to be willing to put up the big money. I mean, we're blessed here in Connecticut to have Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun, and thank God, because we're getting the best fights we can possibly get. But we'd like more, and we'd like bigger names, and that's going to take time, negotiation, and willingness to. We have to build a following, and we've got to get enough people in the seats to support it.
Yeah, but what the trick and what we're lacking, and you do happen to have some good grassroots promoters in that area, New England area. I just had Jimmy Birchfield on the show, last week or the week before, and he's a guy who I couldn't believe how many years. I mean, before I even started doing the show, I was covering his fights, but. The thing is he's a grassroots promoter. He goes out, he sells tickets, he's developed a brand, and he's still doing it. We don't have that. We have the one and guns. I call it the Don King syndrome, which I too fell for. They think, oh, you become a promoter. It's easy. All you need is some money, and you become a promoter and sit back and count the money. Well, that's not how it works, And then now, with some of the stricter commissions, makes it very difficult for club shows, which I feel are the backbone of the sport. And what you mentioned about, fighters in areas like where Lou Ambers fought, the truth of the matter is they develop a following locally, and then you create these rivalries, upstate New York versus downstate New York, or New York versus New Jersey, or Connecticut, and that's what builds it up. That's why these guys had 100 fights under their belt, because it took years. Now what they do is a fighter gets coddled. He gets, easy fights. Now he's 25-0 and immediately gets a title shot. And then when he loses, the promoter will say, well, he's still learning. Well, then what's he fighting for a world title for? A world title fight should the combatants in that match should already be world title caliber. They're not learning in a world title fight, and to try to sell that to the public, and that's what's happening. But hey, I could talk to you for hours, and to tell you the truth, I wish that I'm not able to make the Mohegan Sun event on the 2nd, which when that came out, it came out 2 days after I had committed to the same night up at Turning Stone. They had one. But we got to get together. I'm gonna reach out to you via email. We got to get together and hook up, maybe have a bite to eat or something, and talk boxing. I'm running out of people that I bore to death with boxing, and it sounds like I can keep your attention for a little while.
Oh, absolutely. And I saw the whole interview with Jimmy Birchfield. God bless. What a great promoter. I'm looking forward to November 2nd. We're having our induction ceremony for the Connecticut Boxing Hall of Fame prior to a wonderful evening that Jimmy's got with some great fighters.
Yeah, I wish I could. I had already committed. I wanted to go so bad. I was like, oh man, because I love going to Mohegan Sun. I love it.
Oh,
and it's only about it's about 20 minutes longer for me to drive from where I am to Mohegan Sun than it is to drive to Turning Stone, because I got to drive an hour south and then go west. So and then I could just go the same way. But Mark, I really appreciate you taking the time and joining with us. And I have your links up on my website. And for everybody watching and listening, check out BillyCBoxing.com. You can see a couple of links to Mark Allen's works. I strongly suggest you buy a couple because they're very informative, as you can tell by listening to Mark. Mark, I appreciate it. And let's stay in touch, all right?
Yes. Thank you, Billy. Have a wonderful day.
You too, my man. Take care. That's Mark Allen Baker, and what a great interview. And I love this Lou. When I saw the Lou Ambers book, you want to know the truth? I thought I had it. I thought I already had it. I started looking through my whole library. I have this whole wall that's got, and I didn't. And I'm saying, where did I? And I said, oh, there must be another book on Lou Ambers, and I looked all through my library, and I did not find it. So I don't know what the heck I was thinking, but thankfully I got a copy of this, and it's a great book. But so is this other one, that Jack Dillon book. I saw the promotion for that, and that's another one that really caught my attention. But Mark also turned me on to the Upstate New York one, which I obviously have an interest in. But great stuff. So visit our website, BillyCBoxing.com, and click it. You can go to Mark Allen's site. It will take you right to a site where you can buy his books, or of course Amazon has them. Just Google or search Mark Allen Baker, and you'll see all his works come up. Hey, I have let's see, I ran out of time. I wanted to give you guys an update on you know what, we'll save this for next week, but let me I had a couple of things. I'm way over my time limit here. We got an email from Coach. He thought that this Bivol Beterbiev fight was like Marciano and La Starza, number one. La Starza, there's another. People say that these guys weren't quality fighters. When you look at La Starza, he was a beast, and Rocky Marciano fought him. Listen, big fight this weekend. Tim Zhu is taking on Backram Myrtle, murders. I get comments all the time how I murder people's names, and some people really take it offense. They take offense to it. All right. And, I don't do it on purpose. Some of these names that have every letter of the alphabet, including X, Y, and Z, it's hard to say. I'm an Italian. I can't even speak English that well. And you know what? What do you think I call the show, Billy C? I can't even pronounce my own name. All right. But Backram Murders Aliyev is taking on Tim Zhu. And Murtazayev is undefeated, 22-0 with 16 knockouts. He's got 101 rounds under his belt. The computer ranks him number 7. He's currently the IBF World Junior Middleweight or Super Middleweight champion. He's 31 years old. He's 2 years older. He's from Russia. He's now fighting out of California. I look at his resume. The best fights I saw him fight were in December of 22. He won an 8-round decision over Roberto Venezuela Jr. And this past April, he stopped Jack Colhay in the 11th round to win his title. When I look at Tim Zhu, former WBO World Junior Middleweight champ, he's 29 years old. The computer's got him at number 5, which is above his fight this weekend. WBO has him number 1. IBF has him number 4. WBC, WBA, political reasons, don't have him ranked at all. But I look at him. His last 10 fights were against top opposition. In August of 2020, he stopped Jeff Horman 8. In December of 2020, he blew out Bowen Morgan in 1 round. In March of 21, he stopped Dennis Hogan in 5. In July of 21, he stopped Steven Spark in 3. In November of 21, he won a 12-round decision over Takayashi Inoue in that fight. In March of 22, he won a 12-round decision over Terrell Gashua. In March of 23, he stopped Tony Harrison in 9. In June of 23, he stopped Carlos Ocampo in 1. And his 12-round decision over Brian Mendoza was a real good fight. And his last fight against Sebastian Fundora, he lost a split decision against him in March of 24. And that fight, if you recall, it should have never been allowed to continue. The amount of blood that he was having. So I'm going to be watching that fight. Who do I predict? I think Tim Zhu's going to win this fight, and we'll see what happens after that. Maybe that sets up a TC fight. We'll see. Terrence Crawford was supposed to fight a lot of people, but nobody's stepping up, it seems. So they're waiting for him to collect Social Security. But anyway, listen, boys and girls, we went way over today. Thanks for joining us. Make sure you check out the website. Mark Allen Baker's got some great books, as you heard him. Sorry about the sound problems in the beginning, but we got it resolved. So all is good. Make sure you tune in next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Until then, I'll leave you with this. Ciao, baby.